So before we get started, first off, I apologize for this video being a bit late. I would have liked to have gotten this out about a week or so ago, but I've just been incredibly busy, guys, so apologies for that. Anyway, I've bitten my tongue on this topic for long enough. Today I wanted to sort of talk about Xbox and sort of the current state of where the industry is. Specifically, this is after the awful news about Microsoft basically laying off 9,000 people from their organization. I think it was a bit over 9,000 people, actually. Citing basically the usual BS of economical challenges and cutbacks to save on cost and other resources. Now, this number of 9,000 plus people being laid off accounts for roughly 10% of Microsoft's total workforce, which you have to keep in mind they employ hundreds of thousands, but regardless, this is no less significant. And amongst the cuts were basically huge cancellations and divergences of key Xbox studios, as well as, in development Xbox IPs that were just completely canned. Studios such as Turn 10 and Rare lost huge chunks of their team, and this was compounded with Rare's upcoming new IP Everwild actually being canceled in the process. And the one I'm most upset about is that newer studios like The Initiative have just been more or less, closed. Their entire studio has been shut down. All of those people have lost their job. And the upcoming Perfect Dark reboot, which honestly just looked like a dream come true to me personally. I mean, everything from that game in terms of the concept of what it was doing, it was just like, this is my dream game. I was so looking forward to it. Unfortunately, that game is now canceled only a year after it was shown to all of us. It's so sad. Now, it's hard not to feel angry about all of this. Microsoft, of all companies, doesn't necessarily have to worry about finances ever. So while they can spin the narrative of this just being a, refocus of allocated funds towards more profitable and less risky business ventures, the reality is that of all companies, Microsoft should be able to take on as many risks as they want and be able to swallow both failures and roadblocks and just pursue forward. That being said, here we are today with studios being closed down, people being, left out of work, and projects being canceled. Now, I had taken this extra time of not discussing this topic right off the bat to sort of think about the way in which I wanted to approach this conversation. Because it's easy to kind of sit here and just say, Microsoft has lost their way and they don't know what they're doing and just blame it all on like AI development, right? Like this is the common narrative that we've seen being spun by fans as well as journalists. And yes, while those notions may be true in some regard, maybe they're not the complete reason, but they're still behind the decision making. I instead wanted to focus on where the Xbox brand goes from here and just sort of leave an open discussion, if you will, from fans like myself who have seen and been a part of the Xbox ecosystem since almost the beginning, and certainly their rise to being a formidable adversary to the PlayStation brand. It's just troubling to see where they are today. Now, we've seen Xbox really try and change the definition of their brand over the last few years, particularly this past year and two has just been a huge refocus. And they're working extremely hard at trying to really re-educate people on the perspective of what Xbox is, what it represents, what type of device you think about when you hear the name. And one issue I see from time to time again is that through this effort of rebranding, they're being exceptionally nonspecific about certain aspects of what is indeed an Xbox today. And they seemingly have no real answers when asked specific questions about where the company is headed in the future. What are your plans for kind of tying all this together? A lot of us are just kind of being told to wait and see. And I know I'm not the only one who kind of feels this way, but it just promotes this mass confusion when you brand everything from a PC to a console to a television to a phone as an Xbox, and then when asked the difference between these things, they don't really seem to have an answer. A brand is such an important aspect of any product when you're selling it. And I think about Twitter a lot, actually. When they went through, this most recently when they kind of rebranded to being X, so many people, myself included, who have been on the platform for like over 10 years at this point say, well, it looks like Twitter, it acts like Twitter, it speaks like Twitter, therefore it's still Twitter. And especially when something as powerful as when a brand turns into a verb, I think Google in particular is probably the most famous example for this. We all have used the term, just Google it, and we use that in our day-to-day life and terminology, and everyone knows exactly what that means. But I feel like, to connect this back to Xbox, I feel that in this restructuring of Xbox as a brand, what it's doing is destroying the identity, but presenting itself at the same time, as the same product. And it's hard to think about how many people are going to view the brand and think about the brand in this upcoming few years. What is it going to represent? And we have the new Xbox Ally X coming out from Asus, and this is going to be our real-time first example to see how Xbox, or what Xbox is really envisioning for the future. And if that platform boots up to Windows first, and if every single time you have to select an Xbox front-end app to access your games, then what is all this hype surrounding an all-inclusive ecosystem doing if it's changing nothing to the end user experience, right? Now, in terms of the layoffs and really, from the perspective of Microsoft as a company and the Xbox team, the responses here from them have been equally just as frustrating. I mean, Phil Spencer came out and said this is now the best time to be an Xbox fan, literally only days after this was all going down. We have Matt Turnbull, an executive producer at Xbox, on LinkedIn, telling people to use Microsoft Copilot, their AI platform, to help them find their next job, when AI was a responsible party in laying off the hundreds of people, especially over at mobile developer King. It was reported that almost all of their jobs are being replaced by artificial intelligence. So we have these tone-deaf responses, we have damage control from high-level executives, and of course their salaries are either going up or not being touched at all in this wake. It's just very typical at this point. There's no surprises. The house always wins, and despite the community aspect that the gaming industry really thrives itself in, it is, at the end of the day, a business, and in this case, a corporate one, and this isn't out of the ordinary for people who have been in similar environments. Now, I like Phil Spencer. I like him because he was such a breath of fresh air after Don Matrick left, and you really got the sense that this guy plays games, he cares about games, and he loves his job. But I do have to say, and perhaps this last round of layoffs that just happened, it's what really kind of broke the straw for me. I do now feel that as a fan, as an Xbox fan, Phil Spencer's direction just isn't really the right choice moving forward. Honestly, there's been, too many mistakes for far too long, and in my mind, it really comes down to, at the core of all these issues, it really comes down to mismanagement. And I feel like his communication is often, don't worry, things are under control, or don't worry, things are coming up and you have a lot to look forward to. And then, his things keep getting overturned, or other things keep happening, and there never seems to be a follow-up, and nothing ever seems to follow through with what he's saying. It just feels like what happened here with these studios was a mismanagement of resources, a mismanagement of funds, a mismanagement of studios and IPs and direction. And all of this heading towards, the last few years of just real uncertainty within the Xbox brand. I mean, let's be realistic here. Perfect Dark was just revealed to us last year, and they were saying that the studio was making great progress. You got a lot to look forward to. The game's looking fantastic, and admittedly, what they showed us looked incredible. Yes, there were some development issues with the game going way back. We got those rumors and we were talking about that. I even discussed that in my Perfect Dark Zero reminiscing video. But I was really excited to see that game did pick up some ground, and it was moving and it was coming along and it looked fantastic. But here we are in the next year, the game is canceled out of nowhere and the studio closed. I mean, how can you now see anything at any of the Xbox conferences? I mean, we have Gamescom coming up next month. What guarantee is there that anything that we will see at Gamescom we're actually going to get? Because if they're willing to show us gameplay and announce new IPs and tell us constantly while this is all happening, don't worry, things are coming along great and everything's progressing smoothly, only to then pull the plug on it a year later with no hint or any sort of preparation. I mean, I find it hard to even get excited about anything at this point. It's becoming fucking annoying. And more importantly, what a lot of people seem to be glossing over is the consequences of all of this having the dramatic effect of morale on the current development studios, especially at Xbox. I mean, imagine if you're working for Microsoft right now and you have friends and coworkers who just got laid off and their studio shut down, and it was out of nowhere. It was a complete shock to you. And you're now expected to come into work every day and perform your best while this is all going on. I mean, fuck, I'd be looking for a new job at this point. I'd feel absolutely gutted and scared, and you can't get people's best work out of an environment like that. So I just feel like this is going to have such the knock-on effect of really trickling down to the studios who are doing well, who do have active things in development, and people who are making the games right now. I mean, are we going to start seeing the quality and delays and just all this stuff just kind of, trickle down into something that's just completely unstable? Really the only thing going through my head at this point is that the upcoming next generation is just going to be it. I feel like Gen 10, Gen X, whatever you want to call it, will be the final traditional console generation. And it won't even be fully traditional in that sense, because we're going to have each of these companies playing very different games competing for our screen time. It's weird to me. I see a narrative from some people out there, and they're extremely positive about the direction that we're headed in towards this always connected, always accessible future. Some are really looking forward to leaving hardware behind entirely, and just like streaming services, our TVs will have an Xbox and a PlayStation app, and all we do is sign in and connect our controller via Bluetooth and just play games immediately. Like, the entire user experience is just gone. The idea of hardware is gone. Generational defining titles will only be known as great games moving forward. We'll completely blur the lines of periodic hardware updates and pay subscriptions to just basically ask gaming vaults and use other platforms like Discord to message our friends back and forth. Some are very, very excited about all of this. And, you can't really blame them. If you grew up in the age of day one digital releases, always accessible streaming content, and always connected devices, you can't blame these people for being excited, because that's all that they know. That's all that they're used to. And admittedly, there is a layer of convenience that is going to be afforded by this, thanks to the advancements brought about by purely changing the way that we all play video games and stuff. My only concern really comes down to the form of game preservation, and also unique specific experiences that just emotionally tie you to specific hardware at a specific time. Nostalgia can no longer be defined if it's always accessible and if it's always available and it's always current. And it's going to be innately present with you wherever you go and ready at a moment's notice. Now, is this such a bad future? I don't know. Perhaps the concerns for me come from an age that just simply hasn't been, set yet. Like I said earlier, Microsoft doesn't really seem to be clear on where they're headed towards, but they kind of know the general direction they're at least traveling to. They just haven't told us exactly where they're going. As a consumer, though, I feel left in the dark. I do hope it all works out in the end. I want to see a future where all this is worked out. There are more options given to people on how to experience games. And I do want to see concerns, like genuine concerns that people have about this direction, be tackled and be resolved. But just based off the mismanagement of these studios and then the missteps of Microsoft, which resulted in just these poor people and this brand going through such a difficult time, I have to say, I don't care what Phil Spencer says about this being the best time for Xbox. The adoption rate of the hardware is at the lowest it's ever been. The fan base is split amongst old timers who love the Xbox and the 360, and then these new kids who only care about Game Pass. And then there's a real lack of identity as the brand turns itself into this more agnostic platform rather than just being a single piece of hardware. This is the reality right now, and I have to say, I'm not optimistic. I was in the beginning, or rather I was hopeful, and I wasn't rejecting everything that was going on at Seattle headquarters, but due to these last few years of just bad decision after mismanagement, after acquisition, after closure. And then to add insult to injury, the tone deaf responses from these executives in the wake of 10% of people being unemployed with no warning or communication, it's hard not to feel burned or just worried. I don't know, guys. Please let me know what you guys think. I do expect that my core audience will likely be in agreement here, but I'm also happy to see and hear from others who, of course, have a more positive perspective on all of this and do think that this is the right direction and this is just a difficult time, another speed bump that we just have to get over before we're headed to much better times and much better experiences. It just feels like right now, though, is just one of the worst times for the industry. And that's coming down in the form of the quality of the games, the types of games we're getting, and just the hardware in these companies and these studios being closed. It's just real challenging. In any case, I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and please have a great rest of your day.